The alarm on Victoria Sterling's nightstand glowed 5:30 a.m., but she had been awake for a while, lying still, listening to the quiet hum of the mansion. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort. It pressed down like heavy air. She slid from bed, feet meeting the chill of the marble floor, and moved through her morning ritual with practiced precision. The shower hissed softly, steam curling into the air. She dressed in muted tones, fabrics that whispered instead of spoke, as if her very clothes understood the need to avoid drawing attention. Downstairs, the kitchen waited in its pristine, unused perfection. She set out the coffee mug, white, porcelain, handle angled exactly right, and filled it with black coffee. No sugar, no cream. 3 years of observation had taught her his preferences better than any conversation could. At exactly 6:15 a.m., the sound of leather soles on marble echoed from the staircase. Adrien Blackwood appeared, the morning light, glancing off the crisp lines of his tailored suit. His dark hair was immaculate, his steel gray eyes sharp, but they never lifted to meet hers. His attention was on the phone in his hand, thumb scrolling over the glowing screen. He took the cup without acknowledgement, the exchange as mechanical as the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. No good morning, no glance, just the faint scent of expensive cologne in his wake as he crossed the kitchen and disappeared through the glass doors toward the waiting car. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the house seemed to exhale. 3 years of marriage, and they'd never shared a bed. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. The arrangement had been his family's idea, her father's salvation. With Sterling, construction crumbled under the weight of bad investments. Adrien Blackwood, billionaire CEO, heir to an empire of steel and finance, had offered a lifeline. Her father had taken it without hesitation, and Victoria had been part of the price. The contract wasn't on paper, but it was written in every unspoken rule. She would be the poised, respectable wife for the cameras and the holiday cards, and in return, the debt that threatened to sink 3 generations of her family vanished. Overnight, she had gained security, a wardrobe of couture, a home of glass and marble, and the quiet, suffocating reality of being ornamental. There were no fights, no cruel words, just absence. After her toast cooled on the plate, Victoria carried her coffee into the garden, the one place in this house that belonged entirely to her. The roses were at their late summer peak, petals opening wide in the sun, their scent rich in the warm air. Here, she could kneel in the soil, dirt smudging her palms, and feel something respond to her care. Here, life bloomed back. The vibration of her phone startled her. She brushed her hands against her skirt before answering. Victoria. Adrien's voice was deep, measured, and startlingly out of place in the middle of the day. He never called unless something was wrong. Yes, I need you at an event tonight. 7 o'clock. Black tie. Grand Meridian Hotel. She blinked. What kind of event? International Investors Gala. His tone made it sound like a meeting. Notice, not a personal request. You're my wife. It's time you acted like it. The line went dead before she could answer. Victoria lowered the phone, staring at the roses. In 3 years, he had never once asked her to appear publicly at his side. Why now? The sun was warm on her face, but under her skin, something colder, stirred, part curiosity, part caution, part a restless, dangerous intrigue she hadn't felt in years. The emerald dress had been waiting for 3 years. It hung in the far corner of her wardrobe, untouched since the day she bought it, a day when she'd still believed there might be moments worth dressing for. Tonight, it finally saw the light. The silk clung to her like liquid, the deep green making her eyes almost unnervingly bright. She stood before the mirror, smoothing the fabric over her hips, half expecting to feel foolish for trying. Instead, she felt dangerous. At exactly 6:50 p.m. Victoria descended the grand staircase. Adrien stood in the foyer, phone in hand, tuxedo immaculate, every inch the untouchable CEO of the press adored. He looked up, and for a fraction of a second, barely long enough to register, something shifted in his expression. Surprise. Something else, too. Something warmer, quickly, buried under his usual cool. You look. His pause was imperceptible, but she caught it. Acceptable. The word should have stung. Maybe it did, but she took his arm anyway, feeling the solid heat of him through the fine wool. It was the first time they had touched in months. The Grand Meridian Hotel glittered like a palace built for power. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. Cameras flashed. Waiters moved like shadows between the clusters of money and influence. Adrien's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd with a practiced efficiency that made her wonder if this, too, was just another transaction. Adrien Blackwood, he'd say in his deep, even voice, and my wife, Victoria. Most smiled politely and moved on. But then she met him, James Thompson. He was nothing like the others. Warm brown eyes, a smile that felt unpracticed, like it belonged only to her. He took her hand in both of his, holding it just a moment, too long. Mrs. Blackwood, he said in a smooth British accent, I can see why Adrien has been hiding you away. If I had a wife this beautiful, I'd keep her all to myself, too. Victoria's cheeks warmed, Adrien's jaw tightened. So slight she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. James wasn't just charm. He was substance. As they spoke, he told her about his company, sustainable development, renewable energy, projects that partnered with communities instead of stripping them bare. He asked her opinion, listened when she answered. When he learned she had a degree in international business, he looked at her like she was a rare discovery. What a waste. He said quietly, someone with your intelligence should be out there making a difference. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her like that, as if her mind was worth more than the dress she wore. The rest of the night passed in a blur of handshakes and polite laughter, but James's words followed her home. Riding in the silence of Adrien's sleek black car, streetlights slid over Adrien's face, highlighting the hard line of his jaw, the grip of his hands on the steering wheel. Interesting. Evening, she said finally. Thompson seemed quite taken with you, Adrien replied, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that a problem? You're my wife. On paper, she said, more sharply than she'd intended, and in photographs. When it suits you, but we both know that's all. The words landed like a strike. His knuckles whitened on the wheel, but he said nothing, until they pulled into the long, sweeping driveway. Then he cut the engine and turned to her fully, his gray eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. You are my wife, Victoria. In every way that matters. She met his gaze without flinching. When did you decide that? Because for 3 years, I've been nothing more than an accessory in your perfect life. For a moment, something raw, flickered behind his eyes. Then it was gone, shuddered away as always. Things change, he said. Yes, she murmured, reaching for the door handle. But sometimes it's too late. She left him sitting in the dark, the sound of the door closing like the final note of a song neither of them had wanted to end. Down the hall, she could feel him watching her from somewhere unseen. And for the first time since their wedding night, Victoria had the unnerving sense that Adrien Blackwood wasn't nearly as indifferent as he'd led her to believe. Victoria woke to a sound she hadn't heard in 3 years of marriage, life in the kitchen. It wasn't the muted clink of the housekeeper's china or the low hum of the espresso machine. This was louder, the hiss of a skillet, the faint pop of batter meeting heat, and something sweeter drifting up the staircase. For a moment she lay still, telling herself she must be dreaming. Adrien Blackwood did not linger past 6:15 a.m., and he certainly did not cook. But curiosity tugged her from bed, her silk robe whispering against her bare legs as she padded toward the stairs. Halfway down, the sight stopped her cold. Adrien stood at the stove, still in silk pajama pants and a white t-shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows, flipping pancakes with casual precision. The morning light poured through the tall windows, gilding the planes of his face, softening the steel she was used to. Without the armor of a tailored suit, he looked younger, human. Good morning, he said without turning, his voice lower, almost warm. She hovered in the doorway, suspicious. What's happening? Breakfast. He slid a golden pancake onto a plate, the movement efficient but strangely careful, as if the gesture mattered. Then he turned, spatula in hand, and met her gaze. I thought we should eat together. Her brow furrowed. Why? Because, he hesitated, setting down the spatula. Because I've been an ass for 3 years, and I'm tired of pretending you don't exist. It landed in the space between them like an unexpected confession. Too heavy to dismiss, she stepped into the kitchen slowly, eyes never leaving him. What changed? Last night, he said simply, watching Thompson look at you like. His jaw flexed. Like you were something precious, something worth treasuring. It made me realize I've been blind. The heat from the skillet filled the air, mingling with the sharper scent of coffee. She took the plate he offered, more to anchor herself than from hunger. The pancakes were perfect, but the taste was drowned by the thud of her pulse. One morning of Pancakes doesn't erase 3 years of indifference, she said quietly. I know. He sat opposite her, hands steady on his coffee cup, but I'm hoping it's a start. They ate in a silence that wasn't empty, but charged, each forkful an unspoken question. She caught him watching her mouth when she took a sip of coffee, and for the first time in years, the weight of his gaze didn't feel like scrutiny. It felt electric. Then, casually, he said, I called Thompson this morning. Her fork froze midair. Why to decline his partnership proposal? His voice was level, but his eyes were fixed on her. That wasn't your decision to make. You're right, he said, setting his fork down, which is why I'm offering you something better. She blinked. Better how? I want you to work with me. Blackwood Industries is expanding into Latin America. I need someone with your expertise. I want a partner. His pause was deliberate, professional, and personal. If you'll have it. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed against the counter. James Thompson. Adrien's jaw tightened as she answered. Victoria, darling. James's voice purred through the line. I've been thinking about our conversation. Dinner tonight. I have a position I think you'd be perfect for. Victoria's eyes stayed locked on Adrien's as she said, I'd love to. Adrien's knuckles went wide around his coffee cup. So that's your answer? You had 3 years to make me an offer, she said, rising from her seat. I'm not going to drop everything just because you've suddenly decided I exist. This isn't about business, you know it, he said, standing now, closing the distance between them. Her chin lifted. So what if he wants me? At least someone does. The silence that followed was taut enough to snap. Adrien's eyes burned into hers, the air between them charged, dangerous. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to a whisper that scraped along her nerves. You think I don't want you? You've never shown it. He stepped closer, close enough for the heat of him to brush her skin. I've been a fool. His hand came up, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Don't go to dinner with him. His forehead almost touched hers. Stay. Let me show you what kind of husband I could be. For a heartbeat. She almost gave in. Almost. One morning doesn't erase 3 years, she whispered, stepping back. I'm going to dinner. His hand fell away, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. Fine. But when you come home tonight, we're finishing this conversation. It wasn't a request. And for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't entirely sure who would win. The restaurant James had chosen was a study in intimacy, dim amber light, white tablecloths, and the low murmur of voices that seemed to hush when Victoria walked in. The maitre d' led her to a corner table where James rose to greet her, his dark suit sharp against the warm glow of candlelight. You look. His gaze traveled slowly, deliberately, over her midnight blue dress, lingering at her collarbone before meeting her eyes. Absolutely stunning. Blue is definitely your color. She smiled, but it was practiced, controlled. Thank you. He pulled out her chair, his hand brushing the small of her back just long enough to send an involuntary shiver up her spine. The gesture should have felt thrilling. Instead, it left her unsettled, maybe because somewhere in her mind, she could still feel the phantom weight of Adrien's hand there that morning. James launched into talk of Argentina, the collapse of an older project, the potential for renewal under the right leadership. I need someone who understands markets and can build trust quickly, he said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. Someone with vision. I think that's you. The words hit their mark. For years she'd been invisible, her degree and instincts wasted on polite dinner parties and silent breakfasts. Now, here was an opportunity laid out like a glittering map, meaningful work, financial independence, a title that was hers alone. But James didn't stop there. His voice dropped, his eyes locking on hers with an intensity that felt heavier than the candlelit air between them. Victoria, I'll be honest, this isn't just about business. I know you're married, but what kind of marriage is it, really? You deserve someone who sees how extraordinary you are. She inhaled slowly, willing her pulse to steady. You think that someone is you. He smiled, not with arrogance, but with something more dangerous. Certainly, I think I could be, if you'd let me. He reached across the table, taking her hand. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles, and she knew this was the moment she was meant to lean in, to let the spark ignite. But instead, her mind betrayed her, dragging her back to the kitchen that morning. Adrien at the stove, hair tousled, looking at her like she mattered. She pulled her hand back gently. under the pretense of adjusting her napkin. "It's a generous offer," she said, forcing her voice steady, "but I need time to think." "Of course." James leaned back, but his gaze didn't waver. "Just don't take too long. Some opportunities don't wait." The meal unfolded in careful layers: fine wine, seared scallops, a molten chocolate cake she barely tasted. He spoke of expansion and travel, of teams she could lead and projects that could bear her signature. Yet with every enticing detail, a counter-image surfaced. Adrien at her conference table, sliding project files across to her, Adrien watching her present a plan and looking proud. Adrien's voice, low and rough, saying, "I want a partner." By the time James escorted her to his car, the offer was burning in her mind like a choice with a countdown clock. She thanked him for the evening, slipped into the passenger seat, and kept her gaze fixed on the passing lights all the way home. The mansion was dark when she arrived. Save for one faint light bleeding from under Adrien's study door, she hesitated. In the hallway, telling herself to go upstairs to avoid whatever storm might be waiting. But something about that half-open door pulled her, and Adrien was there. Sleeves rolled to his forearms, tied discarded on the desk. He looked up slowly when she appeared, his gray eyes unreadable. "How was dinner?" "Educational," she said, stepping into the room. "Did he make you an offer?" "Yes." She met his gaze, unflinching. "A good one. Job in South America. Complete independence." Something flickered across his face, sharp and fleeting, and I told him I'd think about it. He came around the desk, closing the space between them. "What's to think about?" "It's everything you've wanted." She studied him, the shadows cutting harsh lines along his cheekbones. "Is it? Or did today change what I want?" His voice dropped. "How?" "You changed it," she said. "Pancakes, coffee, looking at me like I matter." He stepped closer, so close she could see the silver flecks in his eyes. "You do matter, more than I realized." "Prove it," she whispered. For a long beat, neither moved. Then his hands came up, framing her face, and he kissed her, not with the polite restraint of a man maintaining appearances, but with the desperation of someone who'd been starving for years. She melted against him, the kiss breaking open something raw in both of them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Don't take the job," he said softly. "Stay here, work with me, let me spend the rest of my life making up for the last 3 years. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure he could feel it. "Ask me properly," she said. His grip on her waist tightened, his voice low and deliberate. "Victoria Sterling Blackwood, will you give your husband a second chance? Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved?" She didn't answer with words. She kissed him again, knowing the real choice was still ahead, but for the first time in years, wanting to believe there might be something worth staying for. 6 months later, the conference room at Blackwood Industries was all glass, steel, and expectation. Victoria stood at the head of the long mahogany table, a remote in her hand, the city skyline burning gold behind her through floor to ceiling. Windows, her emerald green blouse, a deliberate choice, caught the light, and every executive in the room leaned forward, hanging on her words. Our Argentine pilot not only exceeded revenue projections by 30%, but community engagement metrics are up 50%. We've secured co-investment from 2 regional banks and ink supply agreements with 3 cooperatives that guarantee both quality and sustainability. I recommend we expand operations to Chile and Peru within the next fiscal year. Silence. Then applause. Even Robert Chan, the famously unflappable head of international operations, smiled. "Mrs. Blackwood, your strategy has transformed our Latin American division. Exceptional work." She allowed herself a brief nod. "Thank you." At the far end of the table, Adrien sat back in his chair, eyes never leaving her. Not the guarded, watchful stare she'd known in their early years. This was pride, open and unhidden, and something deeper she still wasn't ready to name out loud. 6 months of working side by side had changed the air between them. Their marriage was no longer a silent truce. It was an alliance built in late-night strategy calls, shared flights, and arguments that ended with mutual respect instead of slammed doors. As the meeting broke up, Adrien didn't move. He waited until the room emptied, then rose and crossed to her with a measured, predatory grace she had come to recognize. "You are brilliant," he murmured, his hand settling at her waist. From behind, his breath was warm against her ear, and incredibly sexy when you're being brilliant. She leaned back against him, a faint smile playing at her lips, only about a dozen times today. She teased, not nearly enough. He pressed a small velvet box into her hand. Then let me make up for it. Inside, nestled in black satin, was an emerald ring, the exact shade of the dress she'd worn to that first gala. It's beautiful. She breathed. What's the occasion? 6 months since you chose to stay. 6 months since we started over. His voice was rougher now. I wanted to mark the day we really became husband and wife. Her throat tightened. You remember the exact date? I remember everything about that night, he said, slipping the ring onto her right hand. The way you looked in that blue dress, the way you challenged me, the way you kissed me like you were claiming me. She looked up into his eyes and saw no trace of the man who had once been a stranger in his own marriage. This was someone who had learned to meet her gaze without flinching, who had traded control for connection. They were still standing close when a sharp knock at the glass interrupted them. Her assistant stepped in, a little breathless. Mrs. Blackwood, there's a James Thompson here to see you. He says it's urgent. Adrien's hand tightened at her waist. The name dropped into the room like a stone in Stillwater. Victoria smoothed her blouse, schooling her features into neutrality. Send him in. Moments later, James entered. He looked different, not polished and sure, but rumpled, the shadows under his eyes making him seem older. Victoria, he said, and the sound of her name in his voice brought back the edge of the triangle they'd walked 6 months ago. You look happy, he added, glancing between her and Adrien's proprietary hold. I am, she said simply. He swallowed hard. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious. The Argentine project, it collapsed. I trusted the wrong partners. I'm facing bankruptcy, maybe worse. I need someone who understands the region, who has the contacts to salvage what's left. I'll sign over 40% of the company if you help me rebuild. Adrien's thumb stroked the side of her waist once, a silent anchor. He didn't speak. You're happy, James said quickly. I could see that. But this is your chance to build something of your own, to be more than just Adrien Blackwood's wife. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city outside. Victoria's mind ran through every late night, every boardroom victory, every time Adrien had stepped back and let her lead. She realized she no longer needed proof she was more than his wife. She already knew. You're right, she said finally. I could build something of my own, but I already have. Adrien's inhale was sharp, but silent. This company, this marriage, this life. She looked up at her husband, and love, hard won, chosen, shone back at her. I'm not just Adrien's wife anymore. I'm his partner. In every sense. James's shoulders sagged, defeat written in every line of him. I see. I can't help you personally, she added, but I know someone who might be interested in your proposition. Robert Chan has been looking for expansion opportunities for the first time that day. Hope flickered in James's eyes. You'd do that for me. You helped me realize my own worth, she said gently, even if it wasn't in the way you intended. When he left, Adrien turned her toward him, not caring who saw. I thought I was going to lose you again, he murmured. Into her hair. Never, she said fiercely. I'm exactly where I belong. The city outside their windows was a sea of glittering lights, but inside the Blackwood penthouse, the air was thick with something heavier than silence. Dinner dishes sat untouched on the table. Neither of them had been hungry. After James left earlier, they'd spoken little, each retreating to their own thoughts. Circling around an unspoken question, Victoria stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, the emerald ring Adrien had given her catching the glow of the skyline. She could feel his gaze from across the room, could sense the weight of words he wasn't saying. Finally, she turned. Why did you agree to the arrangement in the first place? Adrien, still in his work clothes, tie loose, leaned back in the leather chair like a man deciding whether to surrender or fight. His eyes, storm gray, unreadable, held hers for a long moment before he exhaled. Do you really want the truth? I've been wanting it for 3 years. He rose, pacing toward the bar, then stopping midway as if changing his mind. The first night we were married, you didn't know I was in the hallway outside your room. I heard you on the phone with your mother. You said you felt trapped, that you'd never love a man who bought your family's loyalty. Her breath caught. I swore, right then, I wouldn't touch you unless you wanted me first. He continued, voice low. I thought it was the only way to give you control over something in a situation you didn't choose. But in doing that, I built a wall so high you couldn't see over it, and then I hid behind it. Victoria's fingers tightened on the ring. You never said a word. You let me believe you didn't care. I thought I was protecting you, he said, stepping closer. Every morning I wanted to cross the hall. Every night I wanted to knock on your door. But I remembered those words. I convinced myself distance was kindness. I didn't see it for what it was, cowardice. She blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. You should have asked me what I wanted. His voice broke, just slightly. I'm asking. Now, the distance between them felt like a living thing, charged, dangerous, waiting. He held out his hand. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and placed her hand in his. The contact was electric, not just desire, but 3 years of unsaid words, unspent touches, unshared nights. His thumb brushed over her palm like he was memorizing it, as if afraid she might pull away. No boardrooms, no gala crowds, she whispered. Just you and me. His answer was a kiss, deep, unrestrained, tasting of both apology and promise. Her robe slipped from her shoulders, pulling on the floor as his arms came around her, pulling her close in a way that left no air between them. They made love slowly at first. Then, with a hunger neither of them tried to hide, each touch a reclamation of lost time. In the quiet afterward, tangled in the same bed for the first time in their marriage, Victoria traced lazy patterns across his chest. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Staying away for so long. I regret thinking I had forever to fix it, he said. Now I know. Every day is the chance. She smiled against his skin. Then take it. As the first pale light of dawn spilled into the room, Adrien brushed a strand of hair from her face. You've changed everything, Victoria. No, she murmured, kissing him once more. We changed everything. For the first time since their wedding day, there was no space between them. Not in the bed, not in the air, not in the life they had chosen to rebuild together. The arrangement that had once been a prison was gone, replaced by something infinitely rarer, a love neither of them had expected. But both would now fight to keep. And in the stillness of that morning, Adrien Blackwood finally held his wife's hand, not as a contract, not as a performance, but as a man holding the heart of the only woman he would ever truly belong to.